Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Millions of people have lost weight with personalized plans from Noom. Like Evan, who can't stand salads and still lost 50 pounds.
Salads generally for most people are the easy button, right? For me, that wasn't an option. I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. But Noom worked for me.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom user compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
Since 2013, Bombas has donated over 100 million socks, underwear, and T-shirts to those facing homelessness. If we counted those on air, this ad would last over 1,157 days. But if we counted the time it takes to make a donation possible, it would take just a few clicks. Because every time you make a purchase, Bombas donates an item to someone who needs it.
Go to bombas.com/ACAST and use code ACAST for 20% off your first purchase. That's bombas.com/ACAST, code ACAST.
Hello folks, welcome back to another instalment of the Napoleonic Wars pod and another instalment of War of 1812 month. A quick favour to ask, if you're loving the show, can you do me a quick favour? Drop a like wherever you're listening to this, sub to make sure you can find your way back, and share it with a friend. 3 really simple things that'll help me reach a much wider audience much faster. If you are particularly loving the show and you feel like giving it a stellar review, head over to Apple Podcasts where you can leave a 5-star or 4-star or 3-star or 2-star or even 1-star review of the show. Please feel free to add a comment as well. It's another really good way for me to be able to reach out to more people, and it makes so much of a difference you wouldn't even believe. If you are a mega fan of the show, bear in mind that you can get your hands on even more of this podcast by heading over to Patreon and subscribing. For just £1 a month, you can get an additional 4 or more hours of podcasting content every single month, because this podcast has gone weekly over on Patreon. There are a whole host of other perks if you fancy other things besides. Obviously, I do understand that times are hard right now, so I totally get that many of you won't be in the mood for it. There is a much longer explanation of the different perks and what you get and all the rest of that. If you've got any questions, drop me a line on Twitter at ZWhiteHistory. But the most important thing I would like you to do is to take the time today to go and tell somebody how much they mean to you. It's important to spread the love at any time of year, and in the run-up to Christmas, it's more important than ever. So be sure to tell somebody you love them, and I'll catch you very soon. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Napoleonic Wars podcast and another instalment of the War of 1812 month. I'm excited today. Well, I'm always excited. That's a given. It's a podcast and I'm nerding out about Napoleonic stuff, so I'm going to be excited. But today, well, to be honest, you know what we're talking about because you've seen the title to the show. And to say it's up my alley is to make quite the understatement. I'm going to keep with the social history theme that's becoming quite kind of commonplace with this War of 1812 month. And now we're going to look at naval discipline. So you know full well that detailed comments about things like flogging are in the next hour of your life, folks. Hashtag sorry, not sorry. I am joined by the brilliant Tom Malcomson. Tom wrote a fantastic book that actually, and I was saying this to him just at the start, it kind of started me off on the route to my PhD. So this is quite a kind of special moment for me. It was called Order and Disorder in the British Navy, 1793 to 1815. And it was subtitled Control, Resistance, Flogging and Hanging. All good things for naval kind of crime and punishment nerds and army crime and punishment nerds for that matter as well. Tom is a former professor at the School of Liberal Arts and Sciences at George Brown College, Toronto, Ontario, having completed his doctorate in history at York University in Toronto. Tom, great to see you. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for having me. This is a great pleasure.
I gather I'm kind of dragging you back, not quite kicking and screaming into
No.
the 19th century, because you've moved on to other kind of pastures, haven't you?
Yes. Since the book has come out, although I've still been writing in the area of maritime history, and particularly the Royal Navy on the Great Lakes, sort of after the War of 1812, some of the things that came out as a result. No, I've moved on to some other areas of social history, which I wanted to address for quite some time, and taking the opportunity to do that.
So I'm going to start with what is admittedly a very basic question, but having found this out the hard way myself with my own research, I find that often people don't really get military law. They do love to oversimplify. And I think it's important, and sure, this is me just harping on about my usual thing here, but I do think it's important to recognize the kind of the complexity of these systems. So how is discipline meant to work in the Navy during this period?
Okay. Well, when I think about this question overall, the word discipline just fascinates the hell out of me. It's what a wonderful word. And it really has, I think, three different messages to us, if you want to say, rather than definitions. One is that discipline is that practice where you train someone or a group of people to obey a set of rules, regulations, or orders. You train them, in a sense, to move in a particular way, particularly on a ship. You train them to work the ship, whether it's a line they're pulling on up in the yards on a sail. You train them at a gun until they work in unison perfectly on command. That's one type of discipline. And I think we need to keep that in our minds when we think about naval law and order. The other kind is the discipline which people jump to right away, and that is the discipline where you punish someone. And if you look in the dictionary, it actually says to punish, to correct disobedience, which again, we might think on the surface that's what that is, but I think there's far more to it when we talk about discipline in that way of using punishment. You're using punishment to get people back in order, to push against what I've always referred to as a disorder. The other form of discipline is the self-discipline. It actually refers to one's own person training. Like I discipline myself to act in a particular way, and I push away all kinds of other things that come at me, and I take charge. So there's those three kinds of ideas of discipline. When, again, as you said, when people jump to this, they jump right away to the issue of punishment. Discipline being, there's rules, you break a rule, and this is what your punishment will be. And then I think that's only part of the story, because really, and again, I mentioned this in the book, Order and Disorder. And when I talk about this and I take it apart, I mentioned that, those systems that they used to create order, the kind of disorder that was seen and the response to it, when we talk about it that way, we begin to fracture it apart, when actually people experience this all jumbled up together. So when you talk about discipline as a punishment, you're also talking about that discipline of training people to obey a particular way. The behavior that they punished for in the Navy, and I think probably in the Army as well, though that's not my area of expertise at all, it was behavior that they didn't want because it disrupted the ship. It disrupted the activity that the officer, the commanding officer, wanted. So I'm training you to do A, B, and C in that order, and you do A, C, and you bugger up on B, or you don't do it, or whatever, and I'm going to push you back. But not only am I pushing you back, and this again is part of I think the ordering process, actually, that I believe needs more work, is I'm going to punish you I'm going to, quote, discipline you in a way that's public, that shows everybody else on the ship that this is what we want, which is, again, that discipline about ordering people to do a certain thing, and that the discipline was not only to counter a harm done, it was to show everybody else, to help everyone else conform to the behavior that you desired as an officer, as the Navy. So I think when we have to think about it as that way, it's not just punishing a behavior, it's also shaping the entire crew, shaping all the other members. You're sending very clear messages, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I have on a few occasions talked about Roger Norman Buckley's work on the British Army in the West Indies, and he has this phrase, terror and torture as public spectacle. Now, I, to an extent, dispute the terror and torture element. Yes, there is brutality, absolutely, in the way in which the system works across both forces here. My side Army, your side Navy. But quite whether you want to classify that as torture is very much a case of definition, because there are those, this is where you bring in the sort of the John Landbines of this world who turn around and say, well, you just can't use torture within a context where it is sort of legally sanctioned by the law at a given moment in time. Now, the flip side to that is that if you look at modern definitions of torture, it does include definitions that would allow you to class flogging as torture. So, already we rabbit holed here. What I wouldn't dispute is the public spectacle element. This is absolutely about sending an emphatic and clear message. There is a line, and if you cross the line, this is the consequence, and you're going to stand here and watch that consequence and consider whether or not you want the same to happen to you, or whether you just want to do things our way.
Indeed, that was one message sent out, right? Absolutely. Just as on land, they were public spectacles, right? I mean, crowds would form to watch executions or public hangings, or to come to the pillory to watch whoever be punished. In some cases, completely for authority. In other cases, not happy with what was going on.
How much the public element is kind of forced upon you, though, by the fact that it's a ship and there aren't really private spaces in the ship. You've got the odd, captain's cabin being one of them, but pretty much everywhere else is inherently a public space because you haven't got many places to go, so it's going to be seen.
Well, it's going to be seen, but then it's going to be seen. Get it? So there was a hanging. They hanged one seaman on Lake Ontario on the Great Lakes during the War of 1812. Seaman Jones. He deserted, and they caught him just before he got to the United States. Just before. I mean, literally, he was with probably 300 or 400 yards away from a safe shore. They got him and they brought him back and they hanged him. And Commodore Yeo, in charge of the Great Lakes element, the hanging was at Kingston. The ships were all there. He had the ship upon which he served, the Niagara brig. They were the ones who hanged him. So his own crew members hanged him. And he had every other ship arranged and had all the men either on the yards, standing on the yards facing the execution, or along the bulkheads facing this execution. So it is a public display ordered. On a ship, when you lash someone, you had all the people you could. I mean, you might still be sailing, or there might be other people that need to keep a lookout on something, but you had everybody brought up on the main deck to watch this. And they were not to turn away. So there's public, then there's public. Now, if you lash somebody on a regular busy day, people are going about their business, they could turn away, they could occupy, they could talk to each other, they could try to get it out of their ears. But when they have to be dead silent and face the punishment or the execution, it is more than public. It's a message. It's a personal kind of message to each and every person. The same thing with granting mercy. Admiral Warren took it upon himself to grant mercy, which he was censored for, because only the king can do that, for two men. And in one of these cases, and so this again is quite the display. The man is brought. They rig up this platform off the forecastle. There's a gun right underneath it. The man is put up on the this platform, which of course has a trap door in it, and a rope is brought down. It's put on his neck. He gets the last word from the minister. He is asked his last word. The cannon goes off. A cloud of smoke appears, covers him. Normally, what would happen is, again, members of the crew would pull him on a line, and they would pull him up through the smoke, and he would dangle there and strangled to death. That's what hanging is about, or it would have broken his neck. Well, in this case, the gun smoke cleared, and the guy is standing on the platform still because Admiral Warren said, "Mercy, I'm going to stay this. You're not going to be executed," right? So the gun goes off. This guy thinks he's going to heaven or wherever, and nothing happens. And the officer steps forward and tells him. At the same moment, all the ships that were with the squadron at that time had the men facing that ship for the execution. At that same moment, all the captains read out a message from Warren, the exact same message, that it is by his grace, which again he got censored for, that mercy is given to show how kind and caring that your officers are. But the message is, don't do what he did, So this is so public. It's so purposefully sent to help create that order, that discipline that they wanted, right? So those are a couple of examples. They're all over the place when you look.
Exactly. The similarities between what you found and what I found are just fascinating. That kind of sense of, I'm going to pardon you, but I'm going to make sure everybody else understands quite why I've pardoned you. And it's because you need to realize that there are consequences, and I could absolutely go the whole way, but I'm nice, so I won't. But do you really want to test that? No, you don't. Yes.
That's right.
This is why I love this topic. It's so clever in terms of kind of manipulation and people control and all the rest of it.
Yeah, and it's powerful. It's powerful.
It is, and you can tell this from the memoirs, and we will get on to kind of accounts and so on in due course. But what is it that kind of often comes up when it comes to the punishments? Well, in the Army's case, it's those instances where those messages are sent. Those messages kind of resonate and they stick in the mind in a way that actually the day-to-day kind of floggings, they don't. You don't often get, today a guy received 1,000 lashes in the Army's case, different for the Navy. We'll get to that in just a moment. But that's not what comes up. It's those cases where, somebody's executed in a particularly unpleasant way, or there's been a literal stay of execution. It works.
Yes. And in Warren's case, as I said, he granted these two pardons, and he was told by the Admiralty. I guess it made its way up to the Privy Council, but the Admiralty was the one that sent him the letter saying you can't do that. You can recommend, but it's the king's prerogative. And can you imagine having the king pardon you? Again, what a message that would send about how your behavior struck all the way to the king. I mean, that's how this bad behavior, that's how effective it has, the effect it has on us. So don't do that. And that the king may grant you a pardon, but the king is also sending a message. Well, the system is sending a message. Who knows if the king really knows?
See, that's really interesting, because in the Army, it's the king or the Prince Regent who has to review all of the cases that are sent, inverted commas, sent home for confirmation. From the sounds of things, but there is a caveat to that, which is that regional commanders of forces can offer mercy, as in that, well, they can certainly commute punishments, and in some cases that amounts to a pardon, although they're not allowed to use the term mercy, because as you say, mercy is something that the king can give and nobody else. But it sounds like that system doesn't quite exist within the Navy. So how does it work in terms of this chain of command and also in terms of checking things?
Well, you're right with the Navy too. For certain types of punishments, such as lashings from a court-martial, a flag officer, for example, can nullify a certain number of them if he wishes. And there's examples of that as well, but never nullifying all of it. You've been if you've been assigned lashes from a court-martial, you're going to get a fair portion of them, at least, if not all of them. But in terms of the death penalty, again, they do need to write home to the Admiralty to say that this has happened, and the Admiralty will review it and send back a yes to it. I am not aware of the requirement to go to the Crown with this at any level. And indeed, it seems to me that in the North American West Indies station, and the hangings were either off North America or, as I said, the one on Lake Ontario. They were done fairly quickly. So the idea that they were sent home for an okay and an okay came back, that doesn't really seem to fit. Once you were sentenced to hang, I'm sure that the flag officer reviewed it and then it was done.
That's so interesting. I
They
mean, we could
hanged
probably.
They hanged a few people, more than it seemed to me to be a little heavy-handed. It wasn't a huge number, less than 10 for sure. I think there was 6, but it did seem within the short period of time that they were here, there seemed to be a willingness to engage in that. And I believe the hangings that went through were all for desertion. The hanging that was stopped was for murder. That probably was influenced by drink.
So many directions I want to take this interview in right now. But let's stay with punishment just for the moment, because we've talked about hangings, but in terms of wider options, what are we looking at? What's the range? I think in a moment we'll get into this idea of severity of lashes and all the rest of it. But before we get there, what are the options available if you want to punish someone, from the most trivial offense all the way up to the worst? And then also, how often are those actually meted out in practice?
Okay. Wow, there's a heck of a range here. So a captain, because there's as we know, there's a set of legal rules, legal conditions called the Articles of War that covers the ships at sea and in harbor. There's 36 items here, 36 paragraphs describing various behaviors. The 36th is the one that governs summary punishments on board ship. And it basically says for anything else that the officer feels need to be punished, inappropriate behaviors, he has permission to engage in this. Now, again, a captain cannot physically punish any commissioned officer or midshipman or the warrant officers, for example, the carpenter, the sailmaker, gunner. They have to go to a court-martial. And the court-martial I'll get to in a minute. So the captain has a fair range. Now, what can he do? He can order lashings for particular types of behavior. Now, the lashings traditionally have been meted out in groups of 12. Although he can give 6, he can give 12, 18, 24, 36, 48, and we can go on, right? Up until 1806, the regulations and instructions that governed His Majesty's ships actually had underneath, and that basically is it's evolved. In 1806, it comes up to be, they completely reorganized the thing. They add to it. It really is, to me, the beginning of the true bureaucratization of the Navy. It's a series of what I would refer to as job descriptions as to what each of the commissioned officers and warrant officers must, and the purser, and the chaplain, and the school teacher must do on board ship. It does not talk about punishment, does not talk about discipline, and they don't do this. That there would be certainly consequences is quite clear. It gives them all sorts of forms they need to fill out. It becomes very much a lot of recording and keeping track of how things are done, or where you are and what you're doing. It's very clear. But in that, it says that if the captain's the one that can dish out summary punishment, and prior to 1806, it was 12. You're supposed to do 12 lashes, no more. But we know that before they did give more. And what the captain would often do is he would have disobedience and neglect of duty and inappropriate discussion or inappropriate language to an officer, and he could give 36, right? Boom, you just add up the number. Oh, I'm giving 12 for each, right? Although that wasn't always, you get examples, drunkenness, 36, in the book, the set of 800 pages of stuff now, it's a huge volume. That number 12 is taken out. There is no cap. And it's interesting because I certainly found far more than 12 were dished out, and they did not add on. I mean, some of them did add 2 or 3 offenses together, but there is a lot of single offenses that are getting 36 or more lashes with the cat. And that's also found by John Byrne in his book Crime and Punishment in the Royal Navy, which took a look in the Leeward Islands, which took a look from, I think, 1793 to 1811. And he too found after 1806 a slight increase, although I don't think he saw it as significant. But to me, adding my work onto that in terms of an overall trend, I think it is. Once they take the cap off, the captains do feel a certain hand to be able to be, if they wish, a little more harsh. I think the highest number I saw from a captain for a summary punishment was 68 lashes of a cat of 9 tails. And that captain received again from the Admiralty a letter to his commanding officer to tell him that was not to be done, that you really needed to do a court-martial if you're going to give that many. Not that he didn't lose any pay or anything, or he didn't get a direct censorship, but there was actually a number of letters during the time 1812 to 1815 sent out from the Admiralty to the commanding officers in the North American and West Indies stations saying, look, you've got this ship and the punishments, we're looking at the returns here, and they're really too high. So what's going on here? He needs to pull this back, and he needs to do court-martials over this level, right? So you're getting some officers doing far more than what the Admiralty is willing to live with. And you're seeing other officers giving, 6, 12, 18, they do 24 once in a while. So there are some that aren't doing that. What other punishments could they give out? Well, they're the traditional ones for midshipmen. They wouldn't be lashed usually. They would be caned. And so they would be in a very embarrassing position, put over a cannon, pants pulled down on their bare ass, given basically a spanking with the cane. It would leave marks. It would hurt. I think the shame and humiliation was probably far harsher. You could send people into the tops. So there are these platforms of course, on the mast in the ships. You could send them up to the highest top, and they would have to stand there for hours. You might indeed send them up there and not give them any food for the day, which would, again, be a hardship. You could tie them into the rigging, the running rigging on the side of the ship. The Catalans, the ones that they climb up first to get to the first top, you could tie them into that. Now, that's got problems because usually it hurts the person. You can hurt wrists and ankles, and that's going to debilitate them, and so you got to be careful on that. But that's what they could do. Up until 1809, they could start a person, which means you hit them with an end of a rope, right? Usually to get them moving a little quicker, or to get a really quick response to to what you're angry about. And again, it would be a captain ordering it. Sometimes lieutenants could order a starting, although that was disputed after that, after 1809. In 1809, the Admiralty was so concerned with starting as being misused and abused that they ordered it stopped. But I found all sorts of evidence that it continued. And when it came up, even in court-martials where the whole court would hear that starting was happening, no one ever questioned it. No one ever said, we should look into that. It was just, okay, next. And we have to understand that the court-martials were read by clerks in the Admiralty office, and they would bring to the attention of the board of Admiralty, concerns about, again, excessive punishment, things that were done out of hand, and cases that were possibly in a little bit of a hotbed of contention, right? So that's that range. In a court-martial, up to 500 lashes of the cat is what I see. Besides, the death penalty of hanging, they could do imprisonment. I never saw more than 2 years at Marshalsea in the prison. That was seen to be really extreme punishment back then. Although imprisonment, on my understanding, is after 1816, imprisonment became more of a go-to than the heavy lashings. But I think the lowest one that I saw from a court-martial was 50. And that was for, again, probably a misunderstanding, but they needed to support the officer, so they lashed the guy 50 times. But and again, with a cat, you have to really think, lashing with a cat, that's 9 strokes, 9 pieces of rope hitting you every time. So 50 is a lot.
It certainly is, but then there's the other side of this, which is that the army has a legal maximum of 1,500 and will inflict, 800 to 1,000 without even flinching, which is the interesting one. And then we get into the debate about to what extent is the Navy more or less severe, because the counter argument used to be, well, it's drummer boys in the army. Except that when you look at the work of people like Eamon O'Keefe, you see that a drummer boy isn't actually a boy in the traditional sense. Quite often these are, late teens, early 20s. They're young men, so they've got plenty of kind of oomph behind them if they want to flog someone. And of course, they cycle every, I forget if it's 25 or 50 lashes off the top of my head, but nonetheless, they cycle. So as soon as they start to flag, they're switched out. So is it fair, do you think, to say that the Navy is harsher? Because from my understanding, it's the bosun that does the Navy flogging. And the bosun's, the burliest member of the crew, probably the strongest person on the ship. So that's going to hurt far more even than a drummer boy / drummer man, for want of a better word.
Yeah. So take a look at Scott Claver. This is an old book called Under the Lash, and he actually suggests that 12 lashes on board ship are equal to 150 lashes in the Army on account of the thicker rope and a stronger arm. I think that's interesting. I'm not sure. What a great question. I have been presented with the idea, and I don't agree with this, I must admit, but I have been presented with the idea that some lashings may have been a bit more theatrical than real, that they may have pulled the whip and they didn't really hit as much. I disregard this. I don't think this is true. A cat of 9 tails. So if you did 12 lashes with a cat of 9 tails, that's 108 cuts on your back. And the Navy tended to do it appears, the upper back and neck area. So you stringing higher rather than lower. 150 would be 1,350 cuts to your back. Just, that both of them are awful. I don't know how you'd live for the 1,350. But that's only 150 strokes. Again, there are examples that of men being ordered to have 500 and getting all 500 over time, and that they might do 200 in one session, and then another 150, and then the rest in another session. Which again, just the idea that you're not finished and you're going to have to go through this again would be torturous to one's mind. It just how would you think of that? I mean, how would you anticipate that? And that would only happen, again, it could happen months apart. You'd never really know. So when the number of ships that were there, and of course the Navy did it when they did these lashings, it wasn't on one ship only. You were put up on basically a cross, an X-shaped object in a boat, and you went around to all the ships, and a boatswain's mate climbed down the side of the ship and administered the number that he was told to, 25. If there was going to be more than that, then they probably had somebody else come down, because it's really hard to swing a lash like that with great force. After 25 times, you do get kind of tired, I would imagine. You also would have to clean the cat that you have, because it would be taking off skin after a while and blood, and you'd have to get the things, otherwise it's just one clotted, and that's not what you're supposed to do, right? So this would be a difficult thing to experience and see. Again, the crew called to the side to look. So if you're having 1,500 lashes compared to 500, I mean, 1,500 lashes with a cat, the numbers, it's mind-boggling how many stripes on that person's back you're going to lay on over time. I almost would say that the comparison is pointless. Both of these are incredibly brutal punishments. As you said earlier, I think that the whole idea of torture that's an interesting discussion to have, but I'm not sure it fits with this context of this time period. These were punishments that were known, they were public, they were widespread. Lashing happened on land as well, as did hanging, as did a number of other punishments that didn't happen on ships. So 500 or 1,500, I mean, at that point, it's just simply brutal. So I think that the question it's an interesting one, but I think it flattens out somehow, and is not that important, because indeed we're talking these numbers. It's just brutal. The men's back. I read several descriptions in, again, memoirs and letters and court descriptions of what the back of a man looked like after a lashing. And so I'm thinking of one man who was lashed only 6 times. Now, he had already been beaten by 2 boatswains using a line. He was started, and one line was 2.5 inches thick, and the other one was 1.5. And these left huge welts and marks, of course. And then he was lashed. He lashed only 6. He was supposed to be lashed 24, but he passed out, and the doctor interrupted it. The captain was furious. But his back is described in such a way that it's inhuman. You look at this thing; it's all swollen, it's slashed, it's bleeding, right from the back of his skull to about the midpoint of his back. Just a mess. So about 50, 500, 60, wow, that would just be cruel.
I mean, this is the thing I get asked, 1,500 lashes, is that death by flogging? And the reality is we just don't actually know for sure, because nobody's carried out a macabre kind of experiment where you take some kind of ballistic style human dummy and start flogging the hell out of it. I mean, much though I'm fascinated by this, I'm not about to put in a funding bid to try and make that experiment happen. I've got better things to do with my life.
I don't think you're going to get that funding.
Funnily enough, neither do I. But
the source here though is there's got to be reports about the people who did die from it. Although again, I can tell you my frustration. I was able to get a few medical journals from ships. There's not very many of them in existence, unfortunately. Of some of the ships in my sample where flogging happened, and you know that in none of these logbooks is the treatment of the flogged man noted. I mean, somebody falls over and bumps his wrist, it's written up. Somebody comes in with diarrhea, it's written up. But the guy who's been flogged, whose back would just be bloodied and would be treated by the surgeon or physician on the ship, not written up, not in the journal. So, it's very interesting to me. It's almost like a denial of the impact of the punishment by the service itself, but to not write this up.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So is that in the Army? Because the guy, even if they don't do all 1,500, and I can't imagine they would do 1,500 in one day. This guy would come back day and day after day, months apart. It might be a whole year of his life before he gets all these put on him, but he'll get most of them put on him. The medical, he had to be sent to the hospital after some of these, at least to be looked at. Do they appear in the medical journals of the doctors? I don't know. I've not looked, but I'm not seeing these in any of the medical journals for ships during my time period. It would be interesting again later in the 1800s to look in the medical journals to see if the impact of summary punishment, which again would in some cases lead to injury, were they written up in the medical journals or not? So,
these are fascinating questions. This is going to descend from podcast interview into just plain discussion because this is interesting. So I've never actually tried to dig out, admission here, I've never tried to dig out medical journals to look into that. That's not a line of inquiry I've done before, which is quite shameful and needs to be rectified, frankly. To try and see.
I got some stuff around drunkenness, and how drunk were these guys? How? And again, on some ships, there's a number of guys who are so intoxicated that they injure themselves. They fall into the hole. They fall off the forecastle. They drop something that they can't carry and hurt their foot. Some are become delirious, and so they end up in the medical file. So you get to see the cases, and they're not rare.
Millions of people have lost weight with personalized plans from Noom, like Evan, who can't stand salads and still lost 50 pounds.
Salads generally for most people are the easy button, right? For me, that wasn't an option. I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. But Noom worked for me.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom user compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
Hiring for your small business? If you're not looking for professionals on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. That's like looking for your car keys in a fish tank. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit other leading job sites. So start looking in the right place. With LinkedIn, you can hire professionals like a professional. Post your free job on linkedin.com/spoken today.
Yeah. So this is another source of indicating it for what it is.
And that's really interesting. I'm not surprised that drunkenness is common, and we can look at all kinds of reasons for that. Impressment might be a factor there. Let's be honest. You're going to pluck somebody from their happy life and go, you are serving on this ship. You don't have a choice in it. Your pay won't be particularly great. And,
you could drown.
You could drown. But, you've got to do it sober as well. Are we really surprised that these people decide that they need quite a lot of gin to get through the experience? Not really.
Not really.
Just to go back to what you were saying, 1,500, it's sentenced 3 times. It's never inflicted. It's always commuted, which I think is interesting in itself. Yeah. The king turns around on one occasion and says that, in his opinion, 1,000 is quite enough. Now, there's a certain irony to that. A mere 1,000 lashes, but people ignore that. So it's not a direct order, it's just an opinion expressed by the king. And in the wake of that, you still get 1,200 being sentenced. But then the commutation game is quite big in the army. I don't know about the Navy, whether it's quite so common, but there is that inclination to just, you give them an amount. And there's also this very fierce debate in Parliament about, can you flog somebody, take them down, let them recover, and then string them back up and make them take the remainder? And in the army, the ethos seems to be, yes, you can. In Parliament, the legal discussion is, no, there is no legal provision to do that, and it should not be done. It's not a practice that is sanctioned, and so it should be stopped, which is interesting. You know, this idea that you take a punishment, you take as much as you can, and then once somebody intervenes on medical grounds, that's it. The rest gets pardoned.
Not in the Navy. There are examples of pardons, certainly, but no, I've got clear evidence of people receiving the first 250, and then 2 or 3 months later, the next 250. And you know, in a way, because these punishments require, in a way, in the with an audience, and the audience indeed participates in it by sending one of its crew members down to administer a particular number of the lashes to the victim. But the taking that 500 lashes and cutting it back, or 250 and cutting it back, there are examples where they get their first installment, and then they are pardoned from the rest. The best one I have would be Vice Admiral Hotham. He has seen to the administration of a first set of punishments to 6 men for desertion in Halifax who were caught. Most people who ran in Halifax got away. Huge numbers ran in Halifax. Halifax was the running spot. It was a sieve to the Navy, unfortunately. But these 6 guys were caught. They were all from his ship. They received the first installment that the court-martial ordered. The ship then had to go to its station off the American coast, and on their way there, the 6 men petition Hotham, who's on their ship, acknowledging their wrong, begging for forgiveness. Members of the crew also petition the admiral or the vice admiral to pardon these men, that these other crew members believe that they, you know. So there's this interesting interplay between the sailors and this flag officer jumping right over the lieutenants and the captains and right to the main man. And he pardons them. He says, okay, the rest is done. And it's the letter you've written, it's the support of your mates who feel that you have learned your lesson and will behave, and that desertion hurts all of us. It's a wonderful letter he has read out to the ship's crew when he does this. That again, it's just, as we said before, it's a bit of a theater moment, you know, it's a bit of acting going on, a seriousness of it. Is he going to grant it? Isn't he going to grant it? Then they start talking, and boom, it's granted, but not just granted. Let's have a little lecture about how to be good sailors, you know, good British sailors. And so he takes the opportunity to tell these people what they should be doing, and that this pardoning recognizes that they will do that, right? Which is the underhanded statement to see, because the next time this happens, there's not going to be a pardon. It's full on. You get everything. That's the unsaid message here, right? It's not missed in the crew.
Yeah, the parallels here with what happens in the army. Somebody needs to write an article on kind of ethos and cultures of command and the way in which that influences discipline, because this is remarkable that you've got 2 distinct legal systems, because you have to deal with the Navy articles of war. I have the Army articles of war. So we've got 2 separate legal systems that clearly do not speak to one another. Just see what we've just said about the parliamentary debates on my side. You know, no, you can't, you know, let somebody recover and tie them back up again. Versus the Navy, yeah, we absolutely do that. And this distinct thing in terms of lashes inflicted. And yet the way in which this is being implemented, and I was really curious what you were going to say about whether or not Hotham went with the pardoning, or whether he went kind of full belt and braces. No, I'm going to give them, thunder and the lash and all the rest of it. I'm not surprised that he went with that, because that's good command, right? Showing that leniency, that generates goodwill. Actually, Hotham's a good guy. We can trust him to be human about these things, provided we can play the game, which is effectively what's going on here. They're playing a game saying, this guy's never going to do it again, and we vouch for him. They don't know that. Not really.
No.
But they're willing to take that risk.
And in that message, they are confirming to the officers in front of them that they are going to toe the line. Because what that ship had experienced was massive desertion. Over 30 guys ran while they were in Halifax, And man, you don't want that. You're already short of men. You don't want 30 guys deciding, let's go. And they went in dribs and drabs. They didn't all 30 at once, pissed off about something. Now, this indicates a wider mood on the ship. And so when these other crew members come up and say, we're on side, this is good. I don't need to do anything more, Hotham says, and except show you that I'm a good guy and we'll get along. Right? Yeah.
I'm very conscious that we're maybe 45 minutes in and we've reached the end of question 2A. So
I'm sorry, I talk too much.
Not at all. No, this is my fault, because I'm just going down every single rabbit hole that I feel inclined to. So we will skip the next one, which you talked about already, in fairness, because we were kind of looking at this idea of exploitation. And, I was quite curious about this idea of captain as God on his ship, but it's clear from what you're saying that there is this kind of checks and balances thing going on. And there are ways in which that, as a seaman, you do have what, to use a kind of techie historical term, would be agency. You have that power to turn around and go, look, I want to push back on this for reasons, and within a framework clearly they can do so. So we can kind of step over that one. I do want to ask about the officers, though. We've talked about midshipmen, but what about lieutenants, captains, admirals, etc.? What's the story with them in terms of punishing them? I'm guessing it's that thing of they have to go through a court martial, because we talked already about gunners and warrant officers and all the rest of it. But is it kind of, look, you'll get dismissed, you'll get cashiered, you'll get deductions of rank and pay? Is that the kind of punishment system we're looking at, this sort of two-tier thing?
I think there's only one case where, and the warrant officers, of course, also. And these are below the commissioned officers. They're socially separate from the commissioned officers, but they're above the seamen. They're in a real interesting no man's sort of lower middle management level, right? If we can think about them in terms of a corporation or a company or something. So I think there's only one example that I came across where a warrant officer was actually lashed. Most of them are they lose their warrant, they lose their rights. So they're a carpenter, for example. You're not even an assistant carpenter, and they go to 3 years. They go ahead of the mast. You're back into a seaman. So it's an incredible demotion. In a sense, it's a sort of a kind of oppressing. You're not even off the ship. That's where you're going to be. Others are kicked out of the service. Very, very rarely does that happen. There's only one lieutenant who is dismissed from the service for what I could only call outrageous antisocial behavior on the ship on his way over to the station. It seemed like the man wanted to get out of the Navy. Interestingly enough, his court-martial decision was countered by John Burrell, Secretary of the Admiralty, and he was reinstated. So I don't know what happened there. I'm going to find that out. But one day, but that's what that happened. Captains in this period that I looked at, the captains were overwhelmingly charged with loss of his ship, right? And all of them were ultimately cleared. If the captain was killed during the engagement, first lieutenant or the senior lieutenant surviving took that hit, as well as the crew. And they were all basically cleared. Now, some of them were censored about not having enough gun practice, but little happened. There is one captain, a John Taylor of the Espiegel, who he didn't lose his ship, but at least not through inaction. He was incredibly a cruel officer. He was one of these guys who was a tyrant, and ultimately, we won't go into the case for time, but the court martial against him kicked him out of the service. He was done, and rightfully so. He was a cruel man. The other officer was Vice Admiral Charles Sterling, who had a little bit of a scheme to make some money as the flag officer for Jamaica. That went on for the entire time that he was down there, where he basically got money in his pocket for sending a frigate or another British ship with a merchant ship that wasn't carrying species, wasn't carrying money or any valuables, but protecting it from raid to the Honduras coast and back again. He did this numerous times. There was about 10 officers, captains involved in this kickback scheme. And one of them was caught, and he basically turned state's evidence, as well as a local elite person, merchant who probably wasn't able to afford the rate. He turned him in. He turned Charles Sterling in, and Sterling was court-martialed, found guilty of this fraud, and he was beached. That was it.
Interesting, because the army loves to use it as a sort of dangled, almost deterrent. But from what you're saying, it almost sounds as if the court-martial for loss of ship is almost like a court of inquiry. We're going to look into what happened,
yep.
But odds of you actually being discharged, dishonorable discharge, all the rest of it, just not the case. That's interesting.
You could look at the officers' career afterwards. Did they serve again? And there's a couple of examples where they weren't really censored, but they never served again. So kind of a informal way of just keeping these guys away from ships, because they weren't really great officers.
We should talk a little bit about why all of this matters, particularly within a naval context. And again, this might seem like a bit of an obvious one, but I think sometimes the point is missed about just what a hotbed naval vessels could be during this point in time for catastrophic mutiny.
Yep.
To the point where I would actually argue that it's more important to maintain discipline in the Navy than it is in the Army. Because in the Army, if you've got a company or even a whole battalion that mutinies, you can call upon other battalions to deal with that. If you've got a mutiny on a man of war out in the mid-Atlantic, what are you going to do? What are you honestly going to do to get that ship back into control? Short of trying to smash it to pieces, you can't do anything about it. It's a floating arsenal, for heaven's sake.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is that this was actually a rare event to have such a strong total ship mutiny, in which the officers were killed or put off the ship, or in some way incapacitated, and the ship taken somewhere else. The Bounty, the Hermione, and there's another example. The name of the vessel was a brig, I believe. Dudley Pope wrote about it. I think he called it the Black Ship. No, that wasn't. That's the Hermione. Dudley Pope wrote another book about this small ship that the crew rose up and took it into France, where they were all put in prison, except the Americans, which is interesting. But we'll go on to that. Yeah, I'm going for freedom. Oh no, you're not. You're British. You're in prison, but you're American. You're out.
I love it.
Mostly it didn't happen. What you had was mutinous. I mean, the word mutiny, and you could spend a whole series of podcasts on what is mutiny. I mean, mutiny is one of the most debated and argued over terms within certainly naval historians. I think you could get a really good Donnybrook going at a conference if you pushed enough on one or the other side of the issue. So mutiny could be where a guy simply looks at the officer and tells him what to do. Right? Mutinous. It could be where the crew says, we're not doing this. We're not going there. We're not doing this. We're not taking this anymore. It could be literally like at the Hermione, where they break into the captain's cabin at night, stab him repeatedly, and then shove him out a window into the South Atlantic. It could be any number of things. So what we see are small incidences of mutinous behavior, fairly small in terms of the number of people at any one time. It's very much of a singular activity in most cases. I can only think of one case in the Chesapeake area where Marines, a group of Marines within a company, mutinied, and I don't know the circumstances because they were never discussed. Why they mutiny was never discussed. Actually, why is a question that's never asked in naval mutinies. Why did you do that? They never asked that question. It's just what happened. What happened next? What did you do? What did you say? That's it. So these guys, they mutiny in some fashion, and they were punished. But there really wasn't any large one, which is good. But you wouldn't want that, would you? So you're going to do all sorts of things to keep the gentlemen serving aboard your ship in spirits that are, well, if not totally happy, they can be disgruntled once in a while, but that they obey, that you have that discipline. And so officers do a wide variety of things to do that. And that's why I think the ideal of order is to think about how people create order and the wide range of behaviors, some of which are completely ordained and they're trained to do as officers above board, and the Admiralty talks about it, and other ways of creating order which are completely under the table, allowing men to take stuff off a prize. In the Chesapeake, one way to keep men happy when you were short of food was to allow them to take as much tobacco as they wanted off of captured tobacco merchant ships. They captured that stuff all the time in the Chesapeake. Robert Barry was great for this. Captain Barry of the Dragon, a second-rate ship, right? He had the men go over. He actually piped the men to tobacco, and then had them go over in groups into this repeatedly into these barges and small boats they had with huge hogs, each a hog being 1,000 pounds of tobacco. And the message was clear. He said, "Take as much as you can." Now, they were allowed, I believe, a pound a month. That's what the regulations and instructions said, no more. So these guys would come off with pounds each time, plus the pound they got from the Navy. But the tobacco, what does tobacco do? Well, one of the things that tobacco does is it takes away your hunger, right? And this crew's hungry because they're eating part rations because they can't get the food. So they did all sorts of things to keep them happy. There's all kinds of examples. Again, the Navy's very mixed about alcohol. There's all kinds of examples of extra alcohol under certain conditions. When the men do really well, a little bit of extra booze. When the men seem, when it's really bad weather, give them a little bit of extra drink. And what do you see? They become a little happier. There's no pushback here. Now, there's issues of drunkenness. You deal with that. But there's no pushback on other stuff. Some officers had dances. Let's work off this extra energy, guys. So you read in the ship's logs and in the memoirs that they write of these wonderful dances they had as they came across the Atlantic, or even when they were off the American coast, nothing else happened, they'd have a dance. Some officers, actually the junior officers, the lieutenants and the midshipmen, put on acts, put on performances for the crew. Again, distraction, encouragement, the camaraderie that you're building with that, letting off steam, because they would be making fun of the captain or the admiral. That was part of the gig, So these are brilliant ways, and they were used enough that people said, "I'm going to use this. I'm going to do this," and it keeps that mutinous flame from burning. Although I'm sure the men would have complained about this, that, and the other thing. But they were happy enough to go along. So you saw, there's no huge mutiny whatsoever anywhere on the North American and West Indies station between 1812 and 1850. right? None.
It's amazing the techniques that get used. And again, apologies for sounding like a stark record, but the parallels that exist in the army, you know, this idea that you'll let the men take a bit of X, Y, and Z. You talk about it actively being ordered for these men to sort of help themselves to tobacco. In the Waterloo campaign, you've got generals turning around to brigades and going, look, see those farmhouses? Take what you'd like, because you've been fighting all night, and you know, just go let off some steam. I'm going to need you back here in a couple of hours, and then you've got to fight a battle, because this is actually the night before Waterloo that all of this is happening. So you know, this inclination to use things that are not legally acceptable by any stretch of the imagination,
Right.
that would result in a court martial. You know, we've got people who are turning around and saying, yeah, you know, help yourself to all of the crops in that field and don't bother paying for it. The parallels are staggering, because again, I think this is about culture of command, and the tools by which you do it fundamentally aren't that different, because you're dealing with people, and there are only certain buttons you can push when it comes to a person, right?
Yes.
It's just the means that are different when it comes to the Navy. It's fascinating. I want to talk particularly about your book, though, and the reasons and the sort of the methodologies, if you like, behind it, because you focus very specifically on the North America kind of station. And I'm curious about two things here. Firstly, why focus on North America specifically, but also what was unique about the North America station in terms of the challenges?
Okay. I chose the North American and West Indies station. That is the area in which the majority of the War of 1812 was fought. It is a very independent kind of station, very large in scope. Not at the beginning. There were very few ships out here at the beginning, but certainly by the beginning of 1813, that begins to switch over, and in 1814, there's a lot of ships have come out here. So that's a good sample, and they've come from other places, which is also good. So there's this contained area, this massive area, great geographical stretch, which I think has impact on how ships function and what happens on board ships, as to where you are and what the contact with the enemy is, as well as the weather that you encounter, how much you're at sea and stuff. I think, and that plays across the station. So I think those were for factors I was thinking of ahead of time. I picked this era, which is at the end of the Napoleonic War era, and it's this war with America, because the Nore mutinies in 1797 and the changes to the regulations and instructions in 1806 and a small update in 1808 would have had their greatest impact by this time. If, as some people have suggested, Limbaugh and Redeker, for example, that the Navy was a hotbed of revolutionary ideas, it should be, by this stretch of the war where people are certainly weary of how it is, it should be there. It should be seen intensely. Also, Nicholas Roger had said that the mutinies at Spithead and the Nore had changed the relationship somewhat between officers and seamen, and that there was a certain uneasiness. That uneasiness is either going to go away or it's going to increase across the time period. So I picked the last 3 or 4 years because I would say that would be the maximum period of it, the most intensity of it. Also, looking at, because I read Burns' book many years ago, he got up to 1811, then he stopped, and I thought, well, why did you stop, man? But he stopped, and what I saw clearly was there was this beginning increase during this he had it from about 1807 through to 1811. He saw this increase, although again, I'm not sure he knew what to make of it, but he saw that there. And so I think, well, we're going to see it more or less. We're going to see it, but the West Indies was too small. I wanted to do the whole theater, and so I chose the theater itself. Um, it lent itself to distance. I think I'm one of those people who think context is really important. If you look just at individuals and try to look just inside the individual, and you have one theory about how that individual works, I think you're missing it. You have to understand, people have needs and wants. There's a variety of things that motivate people, all sorts of ways of understanding them, but there's the context in which people live and work and experience, all the other people around them, the weather conditions, the threat of contacting the enemy, disease presence or not. And there's all sorts of stuff that can influence the person. And so I think that the greater station, the larger area, allowed me to try to tap into some of that. So one of the things I found was that as they came across the ocean, punishments were few and small in size. As they got closer and closer to the American shore, more punishments, and the punishments were harsher. And this is on ships that didn't have a great deal of shore contact, but nonetheless were off the American shore. A war with America offered an incredible context too, because Americans spoke just like and looked just like the British, right? They still had accents from what the accents they have today, and they had much the same culture as the British did. So if you got off a ship and went ashore, you were welcomed. Indeed, New York State actually passed a law that said you cannot take either a soldier or a sailor that has deserted and give them back to the British. You will go to prison. So that is like really welcoming. At all the prison camps and areas in America, they had people that tried to befriend or befriended the British prisoners and encouraged them to come over and live in America and serve in America. They promised them all sorts of stuff. So if you could get ashore, whoa, you could have a different life. Now, you probably couldn't go home again until many, many, many years later when you look different and the war was over and it was forgotten. But, for now, and you could send messages to people back. You write a letter, that's okay, and that would get back. And you couldn't get caught if you did serve for America, because you usually got hung or there were problems there. So I thought that was a dynamic as well. And you certainly see that people ran, although, as I said before, the vast majority of desertion occurred in Halifax. And Halifax is not that, it certainly is closer to America than London, England is, but it's not that far. It's not that close. And you'd have to go through some pretty tough wilderness to get there. But Halifax was a congregation point for merchant ships. They would have dozens, if not hundreds, of merchant ships sitting in that harbor, all of them quite willing to take you on board. And if you were discovered, to be absolutely shocked that you were a deserter, right? And there were ways to get out into the countryside of Nova Scotia and, fish, go on, because there was a huge fishing industry. They needed people. So you could escape and get a career, get a life there. So it's interesting that that's the place where most of it happened. But there were certainly desertion in the Chesapeake area, where the main land activity. It was more upon smaller ships too, that had more likelihood of getting in closer to shore and having more shore duty. So these context things were, I think, really open in this time period and this huge theater.
So is desertion the most tried crime then, out of what you've looked at?
Tried in terms of court-martials?
Yeah.
The most serious court-martials, yes. The ones that end in death or massive lashing, yes. The number one court-martial was loss of ship, because the British lost quite a few ships.
Interesting. Yeah. How different, because within the British Army, the single most common category of punishment is desertion / absence from unit, which is, we're talking about mutiny. What is desertion is another one of these big, almost existential questions about, are you deserting towards the enemy and being able to prove that absolutely seals your death,
Yes.
versus are you deserting because you know what, you've just had enough, or
Yeah.
have you got drunk, run away, and then
Yep.
gone, what the heck am I going to do now? Because if I go back, they'll try me for desertion.
Right.
Which of course is the common defense that they use. Do you
Yep.
see that actually being used as a, look, I went on shore leave and I had
Yep.
too many drinks and I woke up in a ditch and I didn't want to come back. And then by the next day, when I'd got over my hangover, I didn't know what to do. I was scared of you guys because you're all so mean to deserters. Pity me.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a case of a sailor who left the launch that went ashore at Cape Cod for water. And he was supposed to take care of the boat while everybody else went off with the barrels to get water. And he buggered off, clearly deserting. But unfortunately for him, he did have a little grog on the way. And they found him in a sandbank, like in between two sandbanks, sort of a kind of ditch. And they hauled him back. And the whole point was he going to the enemy? That was the issue, because he was guilty of desertion. That was done. But was it to the enemy, or because he got drunk and fell over into this ditch? And they thought it was going to the enemy. So the drunk plea didn't work in that case. And I believe he was hung. So the whole thing was, did you desert to the enemy or not? And if you desert towards the enemy, your fate was sealed. If it appears, as you said, in one of the other cases, something else going on, then we might have some lenience, but you're still going to get punished for desertion. You can't run away from us. That's a no-no, right?
It's so interesting. We could talk for another 3 hours, quite frankly, and still not be done. I'm up for it. I'm not sure the listeners are, sadly. I'm almost at that point where I'm kind of forgetting that we're meant to be recording a podcast, because I'm just finding this such a fascinating discussion. But I do want to talk about what you used, because you used ship's logs. Now, not being familiar with the naval system, why are ship's logs particularly useful, and how detailed are they?
What I used primarily were ship logs and muster tables. I'd have to say both of them. So a ship log, I used the captain's ship logs as best I could. There was a few master's ship logs that snuck their way in. So interesting, a lot of people on board ship in the commissioned rank, they kept logs. They were ordered to do that. And in the logbook, they had to note a variety of pieces of information, where they were, the wind direction, weather conditions, seeing any other sail, receiving orders, taking on supplies, a variety of things, and times as well. And they also had to record, or were supposed to record, punishments. And it was supposed to be the name, the reason, and the number of lashes. So in a good logbook, you have all that. It's just a gold mine of information. Also in the gold book, because I looked at different forms, as you might remember, of regimentation of the body. So they're supposed to record the number of times and how they muster the crew, type of gunnery exercises and small arms exercises they have. They're supposed to record the reading of the articles of war, and they're supposed to record the divine services, because these things they were supposed to be doing on a regular basis. So I looked at that to see how much that was done, and they're supposed to be in the books. Now, some books are very thorough, some aren't. Most books had most of the information, and some of them, I think, reveal that a number of these activities were not done as much as they were supposed to. I think that's one of the glorious things that come out of this. Also, there's the issue that sometimes they were probably done, but just not recorded. And if I looked through everybody's logbooks, if they were in existence from that ship, I might find somebody noting them. But for the most part, they just weren't. And they may have been done in very different ways. So the logbooks have that information every day from the entire time that the ship is put in order to sail until it comes back and everyone's discharged from it. I think they're very thorough records. I think that they are relatively truthful as opposed to some official letters, which I think officers are bending the truth to make themselves look a certain way or the enemy look a certain way. I think they're just jotting this down. They're working us out when they record it. The muster tables, again, they're supposed to list everybody who's on the ship, where they're from, their age, their rating, changes to that rating and when that happened, and when they were assigned to the ship and when they actually appeared on the ship, and when they are discharged or leave the ship and where did they go. And in that book, when they are given a D, which is, or an R, I should say, which means they deserted or ran, it's to where did they run and what were the conditions or what happened. And again, in a really good logbook, you have all that. And it's just, I think they are an amazingly rich trove of information for maritime historians. And I hope to see more and more digging into these to learn more about the sailors and their experience. Unfortunately, there are some that are skimpy, to say the least.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir on that point, because I'm in the midst of trying to get funding to look at Lascars, those who were drafted into the East India Company Navy, and the official records for trials just don't exist. Get them for the army. That's not you've got to know your way around the papers, but you can find those. But ship's logs are the only hope I've got of unpicking this, and I think they offer an incredible insight that you've just got to mine that data set, haven't you? Because there's so much that you can pull out of that about sort of the fabric of how these ships work. They're sort of the closest you can get to the beating heart of the ship. And we don't have an equivalent in the army. And it's quite sad that, there are all of these books that are meant to be kept in the army and they just haven't survived. But remarkably, the Navy, there just seems to be this huge volume of stuff. I mean, literally hundreds of these books stored underneath basically St Pancras International Station, because that's where the British Library stores all of their archived material. So yeah, I agree, and I hope that there will be more done on this. I'm going to ask about where next in just a moment, but before I do, at a macro level, does it work? Does the crime and punishment system work in the Navy, and what are its flaws? What doesn't work and what kind of needed shifting? But equally, at a really kind of zoomed out level, does it do what it has to do from a day-to-day perspective?
At a macro level, one would have to say it did, because there were no huge mutinies on board any of the ships. When it worked, when everybody on board was following the rules and the discipline, they were doing the gunnery exercises as they were supposed to. They were marshaling the crew, keeping a tab on how they are and behaving and working them in a positive way. Things worked well. I think if you look at the career of Sir Philip Broke and the Shannon, which defeated the Chesapeake in under 15 minutes, if you look at him, he was incredibly disciplined himself, as I said at the beginning, and he disciplined his crew. He used punishment sparingly in the time that he was on board ship, and he punished very mildly compared to anybody else. He practiced gunnery in a way that was sophisticated and copied by his peers. When they saw it, they understood, this is it. This is going to how to train people. That discipline, when that ship had to attack or confront an enemy, that discipline worked perfectly. They basically, I think they devastated the Chesapeake with their broadsides. When the ships made contact, they boarded the American ship as they had practiced a million times from various spots, quickly, perfectly. That ship was done like that. And I think that shows that the discipline worked. Now, if you ask again at a micro level, the men who were punished or the men who deserted the ship because they couldn't take this, they'll have a different answer. But if you step way back and say, well, what's the purpose of the Navy? What's it supposed to be doing here? Did it work? Yes. And it worked. If you look at the broader view overall, not just one ship, but the whole squadron, they were there to harass along the American coast, harass the Americans, to stop merchant ships, and to create raids and tension along the Chesapeake that will take troops away from the north, where they were trying to invade what would become Canada, and it would undermine support for the war. And then the late 1814, the Americans and British were negotiating a treaty. The Americans understood that they were basically bankrupt. In another year of war, the country would not survive economically. And you'd have to say that's because the British blockade worked. And it worked because they were able to manage their ships and keep them doing what they were supposed to be doing through a variety of what I would refer to as legal and illegal manner, right? And it worked.
What I love there is that you've kind of done what I've forgotten to do the whole way through the episode, which is set this within the War of 1812 context. So thank you very much for digging me out of the hole there. One final thing from me, which is kind of the what next thing. I mean, I've talked about where I would like to go. I think, perhaps you and I need to put our heads together about how we get something done about comparisons across the two, because that's a fascinating topic right there. But what needs to be done? Because your work opened my eyes. I got no idea whether my work is opening other people's eyes. All I know is that lots of people keep asking me for a copy of the PhD and asking me if it's published yet. No, sorry, folks. Give me time, please. It takes a while. But there's so much more that could be learned, not just about discipline. Let's step outside of my nerd sphere for a moment, and the fact that I find this topic fascinating. Socially within the army, in terms of the interplay between the Navy and wider society, the Navy and the Army, what else needs to be done to enable us to get a better understanding of kind of the beating heart of this period, which is fundamentally the people, right? And the ideas that are circulating between them?
Yeah. Well, that's such a massive question. You've got my head spinning almost. In terms of, and I'm going to take it back to discipline to start with, at least. So my book on the cover of it was 1793 to 1815, and the reviewers, all but one, noted that was probably an inappropriate date, and it is. I apologize for that. I fell influence to someone's suggestion, but it's my responsibility for putting that date there completely. I believe the date should be 1806, because I do believe my book does cover the influence of the changes in the regulations and instructions. And I know that my data contains people from 1811 appropriately, because they were on the ship afterwards and during the war. So I believe that's really the true dates. And if I ever republished the thing, or ever got republished in some way, I'd ask the publisher to change the date, but that's another issue. I believe that this kind of stuff, a deep look at order and disorder in all the various ways, should be done throughout the entire period, certainly from 1793 on, but also should be looked at during times of peace, because it'd be interesting to see exactly how discipline is created, and the discipline in terms of the punishment for disobedience, or of what I would refer to more broadly as disorder, would be done. And there's some paper. I think the one that I read recently that I really like as a starting point, I'm not sure I completely agree with him, is by Andrew Johnston. And he's looking at arbitrary and cruel punishment between 1860 and 1869 in the Navy. And he has some stuff from periods of peace before that. He looks at what was referred to as the court-martial indices, which are sort of very summaries. Who got tried? Where did they get tried? What was the charge? What was the verdict? What was the punishment? Was it carried out? You know, um, and I think that's great as his is a wonderful introduction to it, but we need to dig deep and read the court martials, look at captain's logs, look for memoirs, letters in newspapers and magazines of the time period to get a flavor of the description of what's happening at that life level, that level of the sailor, the officer on that ship where these punishments occurred, where these court martials came from. I think we need to do more of that across the period to see if there's an influence of war versus peace. There will be, I believe. It'll have a massive effect on how discipline is carried out. And I think that story needs to be explored and told very clearly. I also think that we need to stretch across the time period into the late 1800s and taking a look at when the new articles begin to take place in the 1860s, the articles, the more advanced articles of war, the more modern type, the other changes that occurred in the 20th century, taking a look at the build up to the First World War and discipline during that war as well, and so on. I think the stories here will tell us a lot about the human experience on these ships, and it'll reflect changes in ship design, power of the ship from sail to steam, which creates a whole new level of technologically advanced crew members that aren't officers. As we go further into that technological advancement, and the role of the seaman starts to change, the nature of who they are starts to change to a certain level. Although every once in a while, when there's a war, you get this influx of civilians, and what does that do to discipline? And I think as we go further, the record is clearer, the record is more intense. It's going to take more digging, but I think the fruits of that will be remarkable in truly describing their life experience and figuring out how brutal or not brutal it was, how clear, how fair. Was there a capacity after 1860, for example, of the tyrant captain, or does that get taken away more because of the nature of the rules being a little, again, more complex, more layered, and more in control of the upper levels? Throughout my research and my reading of this period, what I see time and time again as we go from the 1750s through to the 1820s, we see just this bureaucratization of the Navy. It gets bigger, it gets more industrial, it gets layered, and there's a top level that wants control over this. The Admiralty wants to know everything and begins to appoint people. And we didn't even talk about the role of patronage and discipline and stuff and how that orders, and the huge fight that I see going on at this time around controlling patronage, right? It's just another whole topic. However, so I think that's what is needed. To look at what happened during the Crimean War and what happened in the 1860s, and was what happened in the Crimean War. How does that involve in that reformation of the Articles of War? I mean, there's a whole variety of topics that one could suggest for PhD students to look at, and we get more and more and more of them into maritime history, which would be great. Yeah. In terms of the Navy and land, there's been some interesting work lately. I've been reviewing a lot of books, and I've read some very interesting social history books that take a look at officers' careers, and they spend some time ashore and with family formation. And I think that is an area that just needs incredible more research and work, and will also just benefit us so much in understanding what life afloat was, particularly to these family men and to these members of families, right? Again, as you go further into the 19th century, I think you'll get more data, more letters kept, and more memoirs, family memoirs kept that would add to this. And again, I see this beginning, beginning to be done. And it's just, I think it's a beautiful area for research, right? So hints.
Yeah, all very well said. If only we had the funding to start, paying people to carry out this research, it'd be amazing, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would.
Tom, it's been, certainly for me, an absolutely fascinating hour and a half. Also, just a side note, there aren't even any edits that I need to do, which always goes down very well with me as the host and editor of this show. Folks, you're going to want to get your hands on Order and Disorder in the British Navy, 1793 to 1815, Control, Resistance, Flogging and Hanging. You can get it at Boydell and Brewer. Ask for somebody to get it for you for Christmas. Why not? It's that time of year. Tom, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute joy. And please do come back at some point, because we've got a lot more to talk about.
At your pleasure.
Folks, remember what I said at the start. Please remember to like, subscribe and share with a friend. 3 simple things that make a huge difference. If you're particularly loving the show, why not head over to Apple Podcasts, where you can leave a 5-star review and make sure you add a comment as well so that I can get your feedback on what's working on the show. As ever, a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters. You can get your hands on bonus content, hours upon hours of additional material, episodes on the Marshals, on the American Revolution, exclusive chats on a wide range of things, in addition to a whole host of perks. Make sure that you avail yourself of those benefits if you are inclined. Obviously, I completely understand that may not be for everybody, and whatever support you're able to give, it means a huge amount, whatever form it takes. Particular shout-outs. Those who are mentioned in dispatches are Rob Griffith, Brendan Teeling, John Haynes, Beatrice de Graaf, Lynn Dawson, Lucy Tatner, Jim Deary, Josh Keeney, Andrew Leon, Colin Fieldhouse, Stephen Colson, Jim Getz, Jeff Maple, Ed Koss, Indiana Fats, Hugh Brennan, Alistair Campbell-Grieve, Andy Meeking, Mark Anscombe, Bruins Girl, Mark Trowbridge, Miles Reedy, Nick Overland, Graham Goodwin, Rachel Stark, Chris Pramus, Anthony Gumbow, Andrew Wright, Graham Spicer, Keys Bishop, Anonymous American, Martin Pisani, Sam Gurman, Marcus Cribb, Robin Brasher, Hospitaller, and James Fluick. The Admirals are David Priest, Rob Coughlin, Graham Callister, Mark Duckers, and Michael Guest. The Marshals are Rory Muir, Bob Burnham, Matt Bone, Graham Swidenbank, Colin Zimmerman, Ryan Diamond, Sean Sullivan, David Maxwell, and Juo Teixeira. The Emperor, that's J.C. Kaiser, and the Legion de Scholars, Liam Telfer, and Todd and Laird Campbell. I'll be back very soon, but until then, I'm Zach White. This has been the Napoleonic Wars Pod. Take care of yourselves, my friends. Stay well, stay safe. A very Merry Christmas to you all. And as always, thank you for listening.
Hey, it's Danny Pellegrino from Everything Iconic. Ready to upgrade your style game without blowing your budget? Check out Quince. They've got all the good stuff, shirts and polos, activewear, and fine leather goods, all at 50 to 80% less than other high-end brands. And the best part? They're all about safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing. Get that luxury vibe without the luxury price tag. Hit up quince.com/upgrade for free shipping and 365-day returns on your next order. That's quince.com/upgrade.